Welcome, everyone. Before we start our session, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land. And very important, let's be constructive, respectful, helpful, and kind. So today's session is about gaining visibility into the Office 365 end user employee experience. And if you've ever been on the receiving end of an outage where you're working in the IT department, you're responsible for end user communication, you're responsible for really relaying the communication within your organization of what's going on, this session is definitely for you. My name's Justin Harris. I've been in the industry a very long time. I started my career working with Microsoft Exchange. I've spent a lot of time performing migrations for organizations around Active Directory, Exchange, and then ultimately Office 365. So the current situation, when we look at what today actually looks for us as the IT administrator, we see that we really have a low level of visibility into what's actually going on in our Office 365 tenant from the end user perspective. So technology teams are tasked with really driving forward and trying to obtain that visibility into how your end users are actually leveraging Office 365 services, which is using the native tools found in Office 365. Modern workplace teams, they're tasked with really examining the usage of how are our employees using Office 365. Where can we focus additional training to really improve the value and productivity and return on an investment of our Office 365 and cloud expenditure? And then the finance team, software asset management, they're really kind of driving towards understanding how Office 365 is being used for the employees, so to really make sure that licenses are right-sized and that costs are kept in check. Employee productivity, that's a really difficult conversation for most organizations because there just isn't a lot of visibility to see what's working and what isn't from that employee and user perspective. When we kind of factor in now our current situation in the world with COVID-19, one of the things that we've seen is that rapid shift to the remote workforce. I've spoken with a lot of customers, I'm sure a lot of people here have too, where in February, March, the organization made a radical shift. Everybody started working from home. And some organizations, unfortunately, were not as prepared as other organizations. So some of the things like not having enough VPN licenses for everybody, because they may only keep a pool of like 25% of the user base, because not everybody's connecting remotely at the same time. All the way to, I've heard issues where there's been Active Directory problems, because the Active Directory domain controllers that serve the users that are VPNing in, there's only a couple domain controllers. And that authentication from the remote users isn't being spread properly. So it's presented a lot of unique challenges for the IT organization. Employees that are working from home now, maybe they're using the Teams mobile client, the iOS or Android client for the very first time. Maybe they're using a work laptop with Teams for the very first time at home. And maybe their home network isn't quite up to speed. Maybe it's a little slow and it's causing latency and some poor call quality issues. All of that kind of results into a lot of calls into the help desk. So now the help desk is struggling to kind of leverage this new technology and kind of to top it all off. I talked with one customer, they said in mid-March, their help desk queues were over an hour long for employees waiting to actually talk to someone. And when all of that happens and that situation is going on, The worst thing that could happen is a service outage. And we're going to talk about it today. That's actually what happened in early March. There was a Teams outage in Europe. So I want to kind of talk a little bit about that, kind of what some of the challenges that customers had during that time, especially with the COVID impacts, with a lot of people working from home. And then I'll kind of end talking about leveraging the eNow platform and what life looked like for customers. So there's been a dramatic shift from for the IT department supporting on-prem resources, whether it be Exchange and SharePoint on-prem. When it was in your data center, you had complete visibility into that end-to-end transaction. You could see the IOPS on the disks in the servers in your data center. And when you achieve 4 nines for the month as a team, you were able to collectively kind of look back and say, we were able to achieve that as the team. But when we start looking at consuming cloud services, what we've noticed is it gets a lot more complex. There's definitely a lot more dependencies that Office 365 has that we didn't have when we were supporting Exchange and SharePoint on-prem. And I'll give you an example. If Exchange Online isn't working, the team service, Office 365 groups, they don't work very well, do they? So there's a lot of different services that are underpinning each other in addition to the scale. When you look at just scale, one of the largest organizations that I've worked with had about 400 Exchange servers and about 60 billion messages a day. When you look at the scale at which Office 365 and Microsoft is operating, there's thousands upon thousands of Exchange servers. So that type of scale has really made it very complex, even more complex for the IT administrator to manage the platform. Because at the end of the day, when there's outages, and something that I think is even worse than outages is service degradation. So when there's a slowness in performance where it works for some users in your organization, Teams works for some users in your organization, but not everybody, that makes it really, really difficult as the administrator to troubleshoot. And at the end of the day, the very simple question of, is it a me problem? Is it a Microsoft problem? Whose problem is it? Can be very difficult to answer with the native tools. So I've talked about some of the challenges in monitoring Office 365. All the workloads and services are combined. There's less visibility and control. When there's an issue, you're not able just to RDP into the server and take a look, right? You're not able to see that end-to-end transaction. All of that is abstracted away as part of the service that Microsoft is providing for you. One of the challenges that I see in talking with customers time and time again is that dreaded help desk call when an employee calls into the help desk and says, maybe they're using SharePoint Online, and they say it's slow. Well, what does that mean? If you don't have a baseline of what normal is, their perception of slow and your perception of slow as the help desk engineer, the IT admin's perception of slow is all different. So how is that actionable? What actionable steps can you actually take? If SharePoint Online is slow, is it your local network? Is it your laptop? Is it your home network? Is it network devices within your organization? There's so many components between the actual SharePoint Online service and the employee that it's really difficult to troubleshoot that when those type of questions come in. And from an on-premises standpoint, a lot of organizations struggle to manage the authentication platform. And this is something that definitely adds complexity to really understanding that end user experience, because one of the unique and distinctive competencies that Microsoft has is that they're able to allow you to leverage your on-prem assets like Active Directory and Exchange. And you can stitch together your on-prem environment with the cloud environment in Office 365. And it's a beautiful story, but the complexity that arises from that is it a me problem? Is it a Microsoft problem when there's outages or service degradation or performance degradation makes it really, really difficult. I was actually just talking with a customer that was having some intermittent authentication issues where some users could log in to their mailbox and some users couldn't. And it took them days in troubleshooting this, and they thought that it was Microsoft. And the issue actually ended up being an expired certificate on one of the very many ADFS servers that they had that they were managing. So, that kind of underpins the complexity that being able to have that hybrid story and stitching together your on-prem assets with the cloud really introduces. So when we look at recent outages, we could see that Microsoft runs a very, very good platform and service that they deliver. But with just the recent rise in Teams usage and people working from home and people in organizations embracing the service, we have seen a couple outages recently, especially around Teams. There was one just last week that I was impacted with not being able to see free busy information. So from an organization perspective, being able to have the proper information to respond to these things and to be able to set expectations for your employees is critical, because if you're not able to set expectations with your employees, that really reflects poorly on you as the IT department, even though it's Microsoft that is running the service. You still kind of own that communication and that expectation of delivery to your employees. So Microsoft does provide some native out-of-the-box capabilities. The Service Health Dashboard, quite frankly, I have a love-hate relationship with the Service Health Dashboard. It's gotten a lot better. It's definitely a lagging indicator of outages or performance issues within an Office 365 tenant. It's gotten a lot better, though. Several years ago, it was somewhere in your continent, in your region, there's an Exchange Online issue. Now it's a little more targeted. But at the end of the day, as the admin, when you see that there's an Exchange Online issue, you really don't know, and you can't take that at face value that all your employees are impacted. You really don't have that understanding of what does this mean for me and my organization? What are my employees seeing? Something that I firmly believe in is the Gartner had a research note where they were talking about that the SLA is dead as we know it with cloud services. And the thought being that what's a little more appropriate for today's world, today's cloud-based world, is the employee service level agreement. And it's really measuring the employees' capability and their service experience of these cloud platforms. Because at the end of the day, if Microsoft meets their SLA around the ability to keep the service online, if you have a problem, the ADFS issue I talked about, if you have a problem that's your problem and it impacts your employees being able to leverage the service, it really doesn't matter whose problem it was, because at the end of the day, the employee was impacted, your employees were impacted, and they weren't able to be productive. And from an IT organization, that's what we're measured on, right? It's a lot more, it's much more than just keeping the lights on. It's about what value are we providing back to the organization, and that starts with setting the proper expectations. So when you look at the Service Health Dashboard, a couple things to point out. It's not available for end users, so they're not able to consume this information. It's not tenant specific. It requires administrative permissions. Azure AD Connect Health, I think it's a step in the right direction. It's much more, I'd say, a combination of metrics than monitoring, but it doesn't go to that granular kind of service level monitoring capability of saying, hey, you have a Teams issue in this particular branch office or this particular region. It doesn't rule out issues with network connectivity, for instance, like if you had a load balancer issue or authentication issue. It needs Azure AD Premium license, global admin access again. So a couple kind of things to keep in mind there with Azure AD Connect. There's a lot of logging capabilities, but it's much more, I would say, an auditing scenario that you're able to take advantage of, as opposed to monitoring the service health for your employees in using Office 365. Twitter, I joke, if you want to find an answer to life's problems, go on Twitter. Somebody will have an answer for you. When you look at Twitter, I would say that this is a leading indicator. Your Microsoft's official Office 365 status page, they tend to be a lot more aggressive in providing communication around potential issues. And you can kind of see that here on the left side of the slide. But the reality is that doesn't help your employees. There's a couple of funny tweets here on the right side where people are complaining that it's great that you're telling me that there's an issue and to go and look at the admin center, but hey, I don't have rights, so this doesn't help me. So this kind of underpins the need that you as the IT admin have to really understand what that experience, what that employee experience is for the Office 365 services. One of the things that I think gets taken for granted, and hopefully if there's kind of a takeaway, this is something that kind of sticks in the back of your mind, is that outages can be on your side too. Microsoft had said, they reported once that 52% of all support calls ended up being on the client side. And I think that's interesting when you think about it, because that really shows just the value and the complexity and the extensibility and the ability to customize what Office 365 means for you, because you can leverage the Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, OneDrive, Teams. You can pick and choose what you want. You can leverage Teams if you've switched all your employees to work from home and you want a rich collaboration tool, but you may still have a lot of employees where their mailbox is in Exchange Online. So we've talked a little bit about these things. Network is always a got you. Your hybrid Exchange server, authentication. Microsoft, funny enough, did have some issues recently with an expired certificate. I do see that all the time with customers, where whether it be ADFS, Okta, Ping, whatever they're using for identity, authentication, and authorization, it has this expired certificate, and it prevents the employees from logging in. So just something to kind of keep in mind, that not only do you need to be monitoring Office 365 and have that visibility, but you're still culpable and you're still a partner with Microsoft in delivering this service to your employees, because there's probably on-prem assets, whether it be the Azure AD Connect box that's performing directory synchronization, whether it be the hybrid server to provide that FreeBusy and conduit for mail delivery and message routing as well. So I want to quickly kind of go through the eNow platform and eNow solution. And based on all the things that I've talked about, I kind of want to roll that into an actual demonstration based on, I think it was May 5th, there was a Teams outage. And I want to actually kind of show what the platform provided for our customers. So when you look at the platform here, the design language is super simple. Green is good, red is bad. You know, we could kind of quickly understand when we look at the dashboard here that we're monitoring some Exchange servers, everything's green, things look good. The DAG is up for my on-prem Exchange environment. From an Office 365 standpoint, my services look like everything is performing efficiently. But when I go back, scroll down and look, I see two different remote sites. And this customer was based out of Europe, and they were monitoring their Office 365 environment. And on March 5th, when the Teams outage hit, it was very interesting. So what they actually saw, and I kind of set this up in a lab here to be able to demo this to you, is from an Office 365 standpoint. So from their main data center where the eNow platform was installed, everything was working fine. The Teams test, there was a synthetic transaction where it was going into a Microsoft Teams channel, posting a message, making sure it persisted, and looking at the round trip time of that. Everything was working. They installed remote probes in Salzburg and Vienna. When they looked at Vienna, the Teams test was running. There wasn't an issue. But oddly enough, when they look at the Salzburg location, two issues. You can quickly deduce whether you're kind of the part of the NOC team or you're kind of an advanced engineer in the level 3 team. You can see that there's two issues. And the design language here really draws you to really clicking through to where the issue is. In this instance, I can see that there was some network issues with the Teams service. So I was starting to have some basic endpoint connectivity problems. And when I go back and look, I could see that I was also having some issues with the synthetic transaction, and I could see what that error message actually was. So in this instance, the customer was able within seconds, and really the NOC that may not really have that deep technical knowledge of what Teams is and how it works on the back end versus Exchange Online and hybrid and all those, the complexity of those components, they're able to see that, hey, there's a problem with the Teams network endpoint and there's a problem with the Teams test, not in our environment, in one specific location. So being able to kind of visually see and understand context of where these outages are occurring is a very powerful tool and capability to be able to monitor your end user experience. Because in this instance, we were able to see, or the customer was able to see in the Salzburg location that their employees were impacted. So they were immediately able to send notification, set expectation. And what actually happened is, and typically happens with a lot of the Office 365 outages, very rarely does the service just stop working. Normally what happens is you start seeing this rolling degradation of service where it slowly stops working, or maybe the service gets really slow and then it kind of evolves into a point where it's not working. And that's what we saw in this instance. So when you look at the native tools that are available, whether it be the Service Health Dashboard or Azure AD Connect Health, the reports out of the box, the dashboards, none of those give you the tools to be successful from an IT perspective of really being able to understand what the employees are experiencing in different locations within your network. So just quickly with the eNow Office 365 monitoring and reporting platform, it's used by customers to accelerate their migration to Office 365 to monitor the capability or what your employees are actually seeing, to monitor the service health, to measure the baselines of performance in consuming those different Office 365 services. It's able to monitor all the components. It's able to monitor Exchange, your hybrid connectivity, Azure AD Connect and directory synchronization, Active Directory, and monitor all those things from different locations in your organization's network. So if there is an issue, you can triangulate very quickly and visually where that issue is within your network. So with that, I will open this up to questions. Please scan this QR code in order to be able to enter the drawing for a prize. All right. If there are no questions, thank you everybody for joining the session today. And if you have any questions, please let me know, and I'd be more than happy to answer those at a later date. Thank you.